Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalil Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
Today, it's all about Pride.
Aren't we a month early?
But that's how Northampton and now Hampshire County roll. Always the first weekend of May, and that means this weekend is Pride.
Later, we'll be joined by the folks continuing that role, Clay Pearson and Kayla Castaneda, two of the new organizers of Hampshire Pride, bringing that march and festival back and live for the first time since the start of the pandemic.
And aren't we glad for it? But first...
Dr. Jane Fleischman is a certified sexuality educator, writer, program developer, and researcher. In 2016, she received a PhD in human sexuality from the Widener University Center for Human Sexuality Studies at the age of 62 after a successful career as an organizational training consultant for a large public mental health system.
Dr. Jane is the principal in her own consulting practice, speaking of LLC, based in Northampton, Massachusetts, and specializes in training, writing, consulting for organizations, couples, and individuals, and policy review related to all aspects of sexuality for older adults. She hosts Our Better Half, a regular podcast on topics related to sex in the second half of life, and is the author of The Stonewall Generation, LGBTQ Elders on Sex, Activism, and Aging. Welcome to the
Thank
show.
you so much. I'm so psyched to be on your show. I love your show. I'm so happy I could be part of it.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. And full disclosure, I've known you for several years now in our relationship on my previous radio life on WHMP and talking about all things sex and sexuality. And we may get to this later in our conversation, but I asked you to do what I think was the bravest thing in all of my radio career and maybe the most foolish ask I ever made of anybody to do in my entire radio career, but you were so willing to do it, and we'll talk. That's what they call a tease in the business. I think we'll talk about that.
I'm curious already.
Even Khalees doesn't know, but we brought you on today because this Saturday is the return of the Northampton Pride Parade, which was scuttled over the last couple of years due to the obvious reasons of COVID, but
is now Hampshire Pride.
And is now Hampshire Pride, and we're going to talk to the organizers of Hampshire Pride a little bit later in the show about what to expect this year, but we thought we'd do a little bit of history with this Pride Parade, and Jane Fleischman was there at the first one back in 1982, and then several in the years following. And as many people who have been in the recent decades may have noticed, the Northampton Pride Parade is a really fun, positive, vibrant family affair, but that is not what the parade started out as. Dr. Jane, tell us what you remember about that first Pride Parade.
Well, Monty, you have to sort of go back in time, right? 1980s was bad times. It was Reagan years. We thought Reagan was the worst. Little did we know what else would be coming into the White House. But in the early 80s, we were fighting the AIDS crisis, and we didn't even know what it was yet, right? We were dealing with homophobia at a level that was really huge and rampant. And what we're seeing now in terms of anti-LGBTQ legislation on a lot of state legislature levels, we were just trying to get laws passed that said we could have the right to housing, to employment, to keep our children. You know what I'm saying? We were starting at the bottom level. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, we were just right there at the bottom in the basement. And so when we started that first march, it wasn't even a march. You guys, it was a stand, you know what I mean? We were in Pulaski Park, if you know Pulaski Park, downtown Northampton, which is really small, right? There was like maybe 12 of us, and we were very political in those days. And we were fighting against some really treacherous enemies. And they were right there. They were on the periphery. They were standing there with their raincoats open. I don't know what that's about, with pictures of dead babies inside their raincoats. Like, already they were clearly showing us they were not only anti what we called gay rights in those days, they were anti-abortion and reproductive rights, right? They were literally combining these two. And we felt like we had to be super political. And I was a labor organizer back in those days. I was actually getting my master's at UMass in the labor studies program with Bill Newman's wife, Dale. Anyway.
We'll talk about Bill Newman in a little bit. And shout out to Dale Melcher and the labor studies program, none of whom were available to come on May Day, but all of whom were
Okay,
asked.
good to know. Yeah. So May Day was like our holiday, right? And that first Pride, what's hard to imagine now is how intersectional we were. We were talking about sexuality as a human right. We were talking about as a basic living right. Just like we talk about housing now and food justice and living wages. We were talking about our sexuality as a basic human right. And in some ways, the movement sort of veered off of that over the last 40 years. We went into legislation and we went into gays in the military. We used to call it gays in the millenary, and we would wear big hats. Was our for that. But
I would go to
but
that
there were
one.
people
Yeah.
with paper bags over their heads. This is no joke. There were people there who were afraid, and because I was sort of young and kind of crazy, I wasn't scared. But it was scary. It was a scary thing to stand up for gay rights in those days, I have to say. And we didn't even know,
Talk a little bit about
know
why-
what was going to happen. You know what I'm saying?
When people hear that there were paper bags over their heads, it wasn't necessarily, and hopefully wasn't at all, because they were ashamed of who they were. It was they were afraid of the consequences. Can you
Totally.
talk about what might have happened
Totally.
if you were to have been outed at that
so
time?
I remember going to a gay pride march. I was a state employee in the state of Connecticut. Who was my boss? The governor. And who was the governor in those days? A guy named John Rowland, who went to jail, by the way, for taking bribes, etc. But anyway, he was our governor. And I was at a gay pride march in Hartford. And I got on the news because you know me, Monty. I love being on I like being on the radio. I see a microphone, I go running toward it. So that was on a Saturday. On Monday, I get back to work, and my boss says, "Oh, I saw you on the news." And at that moment, I realized, holy moly, I can get fired for this. I didn't have any protection yet. So people were scared they were going to lose their jobs. And, there's a long tradition of putting gay people in harm's way in terms of police violence, in terms of riots and bars, places where people just wanted to go and dance and kiss and find somebody that they could hang out with, maybe even have sex with. These are people who were totally brave because at the end of the night, often the lights would go on and off, the paddy wagon would be outside, and people would be sent right into the paddy wagon, and then they'd be handcuffed, and their names would be in the press the next day, and that's where people were at. So people were not ashamed in any way. I think it was more about fear of consequences.
And you write about Stonewall in your book, and what you've just described about the police violence and the bar situation is what that story is all about. Speaking with Dr. Jane Fleischman from Northampton about the early days of the Northampton Pride Parade, which back in 1982 was called the Northampton Lesbian and Gay Liberation March, and as you mentioned, at the time, a much more political march rather than a fun, festive parade like it will likely be this Saturday. Although I know there are people even this year that are concerned about all the trans, the anti-trans
I would say that
rhetoric and danger.
it is always a political statement.
Absolutely.
Regardless. Like, it is fun, and it can be fun, but it is always a
Absolutely,
political
Clay. And you're so right on. You're so right on because people forget, like, oh, we're going to go have a festival and it's going to be fun. We'll get some free stuff from the vendors. But it's a political situation. And right now, it's even worse. And you know what? Those early days, the Gay and Lesbian Liberation March, it was specifically adding lesbian to that. That was a big deal in 1981, 82. Like, we had to, shoehorn our way in as lesbians. We were like, push aside, guys, we're going to get in there. And then the same thing happened to bisexuals who wanted to be part of it. And people were like, oh, no, they will dilute the cause. I mean, it was crazy stuff.
Not to mention the people who still don't believe that bisexuality and pansexuality
Thank
is a
you.
thing.
Yeah, it's just a phase. Come on, just a phase. And then, people in my book
So much
in their
justifying.
80s, right? In their 80s are talking about being bisexual. This is not a phase, folks. I hate to say it. It's just another choice. So yeah, this is the culmination in some ways of all the great progress we've made over the last 40 years is this pushback that we're seeing today. It's that other side of really pushing against great progress and great human rights progress.
We're speaking with Dr. Jane Fleischman, who was at the first Northampton Pride March back in 1982, and our mutual friend, who I got to know you through, Dr. Jane, Bill Newman, who we've referenced now and is a host of a great show on WHMP still. He had to sue the city of Northampton to allow this parade to happen. What do you remember about the city of Northampton, which many people today, it was just voted on some travel magazine as the most hippie progressive community in Massachusetts, but at the time, this was not something that the city embraced.
Yeah, we were scrappers back then, Monty. We weren't going for a permit. Even if they would have given it to us, we weren't interested in a permit. We walked on the sidewalk. You know what I'm saying? We didn't see ourselves as a big movement. There were no political figures, elected officials, churches or synagogues who wanted to march with us. There were no daycare centers who wanted to march with us. So the fact that Newman and his partner, Wendy, sued the city was amazing. But I didn't even know about that because that was happening somewhere else. We were scrappers. We were radicals. We were trying to take up a little bit of space to talk about this issue that wasn't a single issue, but it was connected to all these other issues.
I will say that if you want to see photos from those first marches, the Forbes Library has a great online collection, so you can see how much things have changed and how much they say the same. As Kayla was mentioning too, that there was a lot less fun family stuff in those early photos, and all of the signs were very, very political.
I feel like if you were still in touch with your family, you were very lucky at that point.
Yeah, and there are people to this day who are still very lucky to be. The parade has been going on in one way, shape, or form since the early 1980s. Let's put COVID aside for a little bit, although I will say a proud moment as a dad is when in May of 2020, my then 12-year-old son was tasked by Northampton Pride to make an online video version of the Northampton Pride Parade that got videos from Senator Elizabeth Warren and Joe Comerford and all sorts of community members that did this virtual Pride Parade. But it's been going on in many incarnations since 1982. Do you remember there being a shift from it being almost exclusively political to political but a fun family affair? Or was it a slow transition to that point?
I think there was a transition that occurred. Now, Monty, I love to have fun. I love to laugh. Kayla, you can get that, right? Early days, we weren't having fun. This was not a fun event. This was a serious protest. And we were standing up to the man, right? We were scared to death. It was big. So after a while, when the terms of what we were working on got a little bit more, quote unquote, palatable to the American public, then the Pride March got a little bit too serious. It was too serious. And people wanted it to go more in the festival way. And I remember lots of folks saying, I don't go to the parade anymore, I just go to the festival. It's like, the parade is for you protesters, you serious types. I'm not really that serious, but, it was the political types. And then everybody else would come to the festival. It was true, Monty. Like in the old days, there was probably, twice as many people at the festival as there were in the march. And then as we progressed and got more and more public exposure, and I think also all the polls started to show that the public was much more interested in the kinds of issues that we were talking about in terms of LGBTQ, etc., we realized that there was a lot more people watching the march than there were people in the march. So that was really exciting. And then the last few years, when our kids were in a Bridge Street School, there was a Bridge Street School banner, there was a pickup truck they could ride on the back of and throw candy onto the spectators. You know what I'm saying? It became a completely different kind of family, fun, funky event. And, at this point in my life, I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of the politics. I have to say, we need it now more than ever. We need it.
Okay, so truth-telling time. That has always been my issue with Northampton Pride. I want more politics in the parade. It doesn't have to be all of it. I definitely don't need it to be all of it, but I would just like there to be a little bit more acknowledgement of the fact we're all here and we're celebrating, but hey, this fight is not over.
And far from it, hundreds and hundreds of bills I don't even know the number anymore, please.
It's an alarming number.
And anti-trans stuff is going on here as well, right? It's going on right here in our midst in Northampton, where we believe that we're pretty safe, and it's happening all over the rest of the world. So I think, you're absolutely right. We've got to find some way to bring the politics back into this. And, keep people happy by getting the beer flowing and the whatever, performers are going to be up there. I don't even know any of the performers anymore.
Like, here's a small pamphlet on this issue, but also here's a lollipop.
Right.
Yay.
Yeah. Hopefully later in the show we'll hear about some of those performers and about the people that will be handing out the pamphlets and talking about these very important issues in a time when the amount of books that are being banned across the country, most of which have to do with LGBTQ issues, is off the charts in record numbers. So there are these important issues that people care deeply about.
Did you notice, especially since you were at that first Pride March, like how the queer community kind of grew out of those first early prides, not just like, and people like starting to come around to the idea that we're going to be here for, well, and we're okay, but like just seeing the community like starting to blossom around like that.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of defeats in those years, right? We were trying to get anti-discrimination language in a lot of state legislatures. We were failing. And so it was a long struggle. And I remember every year we'd have this after the end of the session party to say, okay, we lost, but we're going to keep going. And those are just legislative issues, but I'm talking about even broader issues. So yeah, I think those were the kernels of the kind of resistance. And it started happening way before then, way before Stonewall. There were people in the 50s and the 40s who were fighting against anti-communism. There were people in the 60s fighting against the Vietnam War. And they were all people who would be under this LGBTQ umbrella today, but they couldn't really come out. Look at Bayard Rustin, a great example, Kayla, of what you're saying. A black communist who was also a gay man. But he couldn't come out as a gay man because he didn't want to split the civil rights movement. He didn't want to hurt Dr. King. And so, these are people who were in critical, pivotal, architect kind of moments, and they couldn't come out yet. So yeah, people have been doing this work.
The postman on Mr. Rogers, too.
Interesting.
And the postman on Mr. Rogers changed Mr. Rogers' views about the LGBT.
Yeah, that's a cool story, too. Yeah, I love that. See, Monty, those stories sometimes work.
Coming up, we'll talk about one of those times that decidedly did not work when Dr. Jane Fleischman sat face-to-face with one of the biggest anti-LGBTQ activists in the area and in the world in a radio studio with me.
And you owe her so much for that. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM.
We're speaking with Dr. Jane Fleischman, who is a PhD, a sex educator, specifically dealing with sexuality of older individuals, the author of the book The Stonewall Generation, LGBTQ Elders on Sex, Activism, and Aging, and who was at the first Northampton Pride March.
I have one other thing that I thought you two would be interested in. You know how I was saying early on, it was really like the intersection of labor rights and human rights and racial justice and feminism. It was all in there with what we called gay rights. A lot of the Pride committees around the country were particularly getting older, and they were particularly white. And so in a lot of places, like in Boston, there was a big overthrow, basically, of the old committee. And now there's a much more, multi-everything, multicultural, multi-gendered, you know what I'm saying? The new committee really speaks to the politics that we are hoping to bring forward today. And so I love that. And I'm so proud that people are stepping up. Because I know, when I do my work, I'm a white Jewish girl from Long Island. I mean, I'm a lesbian, but I'm still a white Jewish middle-class girl from Long Island. So when I want to speak, I need to have other people speaking next to me so that there are other voices that can be heard. And that's what I'm hoping continues with the future of these Pride marches.
I think the last committee did that pretty well too, and this committee I have a lot of hope for.
And we're gonna meet some folks from the new committee coming up a little bit later in the show. Clay Pearson, the organizer of this year's Hampshire Pride Parade, as well as Kayla Castaneda, who's the manager of the Majestic Theater and involved with Hampshire Pride now. Before we get to what I was teasing about earlier about doing one of the bravest things I've ever seen anybody do on the radio, and I've ever foolishly asked anybody to do on the radio. Thinking back to those early days where the marchers are getting eggs thrown at them, where people are having to wear paper bags on their head for fear if they're outed that they would lose their jobs. While there is still a lot of work left to be done, of course, Could you have imagined in 1982 or in those early years how an event like this parade would have transformed to what it is today, where the Bridge Street School will be marching, where my Kung Fu class is going to be there, on the streets, and people from all different avenues and walks of life will be part of this.
Are you kidding, Monty? I never could have imagined. Never could have imagined. I mean, we had a conference for queer youth back in the day called Children from the Shadows, right? It was about what it was like to be a kid growing up in a world where you knew that you were not going to fit into that heterosexual norm. And for me, as a young person in my 20s coming out, I never could have imagined that I'd be allowed to get benefits, that I'd be allowed to sit in the front row with my girlfriend, that she's in her late 60s now. I still call her my girlfriend. We've been married 3 times. But could I imagine that people would applaud us, that we could actually ever even want to get married? That's another whole interesting story.
Let me stop you right there because there's a funny anecdote. I'll tell it very quickly. Equal marriage passes in Massachusetts. I'm working with Rachel Maddow at WRSI. She's asked to speak City Hall in Northampton as this big celebration of this victory, and basically gets up there and says, just because it's legal to get married doesn't mean you have to. Good night.
That's how I felt. That's exactly what I felt. The only reason we did it is I wanted to party. But it's so true.
Yeah. John Waters said the same thing when he came and spoke at the Academy of Music. He's just like, I thought one of the benefits of being gay was that you didn't have to get married, but it's really cool that you can now.
Yeah, and The Onion also has a headline that says, first the military and now marriage? What is it that gays want with our worst institutions?
But I remember being brought into the Human Resources office, right, when domestic partnership was first, interim level. And I thought, I'm getting called into the principal's office. What I do wrong? I'm in trouble. She said, we're aware that you live with your female partner. Would you be interested in getting domestic partnership rights? And I looked at her like, are you nuts? You're actually offering me something? Like I'm going to get a benefit now? That's incredible. So I guess what I'm going to say to you is I never imagined it. And there's a part of me, this is going to sound a little strange, but there's a part of me that misses the days where we were way more edgy, where we weren't so mainstreamed, where it was just a whole other world, where a lesbian bar was a really different place that you could walk into and feel that you were in a different part of the world. So we don't even have lesbian bars that many anymore. So I got to say, it was hard for me to ever imagine this kind of acceptance, if you will, but I'm still looking for true liberation. Because acceptance and assimilation is one thing, but it's not true liberation. And that's where I'm still hoping, and working toward.
It's like that conversation that you get to have with people about tolerance and how, maybe that's not the thing you want to be looking for or working towards.
We've been talking a lot about how a lot of work has gone into the rights that the LGBTQ community has gained over the last few years, but that there's more to be done. And we're hearing lots of stories, especially about trans people in this country, but across the globe, about LGBTQ rights. One of the chief people who has gone across the world speaking against LGBTQ rights grew up in, I believe, Shelburne, but then made his home in Springfield, Massachusetts. And his name is Scott Lively. The Southern Poverty Law Center calls him a veteran of the anti-gay movement, has been actively propagandizing against LGBTQ people since the early 1990s. He's largely been the one who's credited for inspiring what became the Kill the Gays bill in Uganda. But given that he was local in the area and was running for governor, I invited him onto the airwaves of my former radio station, WHMP. And me being a Pollyanna and believing that every Darth Vader has an Anakin Skywalker living inside of them, I thought if we surrounded Scott Lively with gay couples and we just had to sit down together and talk with one another, that the Anakin Skywalker would come out. And Dr. Jane Fleischman.
Did you just curl up into a ball and shake?
No. I failed miserably, but one of the first people who volunteered to do this extraordinarily brave act on the radio was Dr. Jane Fleischman and her partner. Now, Scott Lively's ideas about what it means to be gay, what it means to be homosexual and live a lifestyle like that, from his rhetoric, seemed to me to be so far off base from what I knew about every single gay person that I knew, that I firmly believed that maybe he had never actually met a gay person. So I brought 4 of them into the studio with me and surrounded him in the hopes that he was going to turn into Anakin Skywalker, take my helmet off so I can look at you with my own eyes. But that's not what happened, Dr. Jane. What was your recollection of that extraordinarily uncomfortable
We
moment?
were so tightly packed in there. That radio station had like no room. So like my knee was almost up against his knee. That was scary. And he was the voice of doom, Monty. He was the bad of the bad. When I read about David Kato's murder in Uganda, I said, I got to do something. I called my friends in Springfield, and they were already getting organized because they had heard from where he previously lived that he was coming to Springfield to set up another one of these anti-people ministries, and it was just down the block from him. So I got involved in working on this cause, and we took him to federal court. I mean, we ran him out. I have to say, we ran him out. But the thing is that he prevailed because that bill in Uganda just passed. And I heard a woman on the radio recently saying, I have failed my children because I'm gay and I cannot keep them and I'm going to die. I mean, it was just so poignant. He was very scary to sit next to. And the stuff he was sort of foaming at the mouth. Do you remember that, Monty? He was just like going on and on about, he was talking about his book about gays in
the pink triangle. He was trying to equate homosexuality with Nazis. He's literally the only scholar in the world who has made this connection. Right. So I mean, I'm not trying to be one-sided about this, but like their international courts have tried to bring him up on hate crimes. And this is somebody from our own community, in a community that, again, espouses all these progressive ideals, and yet...
And it's rare that you get to really see the enemy right up close. So the one good thing that you did that day, Monty, was I got to see him right up close, and it was something. I never wanted to be in the same room with him again, but I got to see him foam at the mouth, and in some ways, he just obliterated us, right? We were all sitting in the same row, but he just obliterated us, and he went forward with this really, pretty dangerous and hateful speech that all we could do was counter with our beings, right? That's all we could do at that moment. We couldn't organize any march right there. We were right there, sitting there. So it was something. I never, ever felt bad that you invited me. I was always really happy that you did that.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, because I oftentimes think, was that the right idea? But what the greatest failure I felt like from that was the rhetoric that it was like he had talking points, none of which seemed to make any logical sense, stuck to them, and would never acknowledge any of you as human beings.
It is the hardest to convert the true believers. There's a sort of like false pretense of them coming to the table with people to, like have a conversation, like maybe we can change your mind, but like it's always the hardest to get the people who really, really believe the things that they're saying to even acknowledge you.
Yeah, we didn't feel very acknowledged.
Which isn't to say that you don't stop trying, because if we stop trying, we die. But like, I can't imagine the Everest that would be to get him to maybe knock over a molehill.
Dr. Jane Fleischman, it's been a delight talking to you. We had to turn this back to somehow positive after all that. And we're going to talk about it. That's how we're going to do it right now, because we're going to talk about this year's return of Northampton Pride, Hampshire Pride. Dr. Jane Fleischman, certified sexuality educator, the host of the podcast Our Better Half, the author of the book The Stonewall Generation, LGBTQ Elders on Sex, Activism, and Aging, and someone who was at the first ever Northampton Pride March. Are you going this weekend, Dr. Jane?
I'm away, so I have a long planned vacation.
Say yes. You're supposed to lie right now and say yes. I am
thought
coming.
you were going to ask me, and I figured I don't want to lie, because then if I don't see anybody, they'll be really like, what? So no, I got this long planned vacation going to the Cape, but yeah, I'm so glad it's happening. So, and also you too. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I love being here. I love what you're doing.
Up next, find out what's in store for this year's Hampshire Pride with Clay Pearson, Kayla Castaneda, and Celina Almendarez, 3 of the new organizers of this Saturday's first live and in-person Pride Parade since the pandemic.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Kayla Smith.
Well, we've heard a lot about what's gone on in Northampton Pride's past, but what is going to happen with Northampton Pride's future?
And present.
Well, it's technically future because it's Saturday. It hasn't
Okay.
happened yet. And joining us are three of the organizers, Clay Pearson, Kayla Abney, and Celina Almendarez, who are taking up the mantle of this important piece of what goes on in Hampshire County. No longer Northampton Pride or NoHo Pride, but Hampshire Pride, expanding the reach of this organization and this parade, which will still technically take place in Northampton. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics about the parade. Where and when is it going to start? Who shall we start with?
I guess I'll start. So I'm Clay Pearson. Thank you so much for having us here to start with. But yeah, let me just tell you about the parade. The parade is actually going to start at 11 a.m. at Sheldon Field, which is at the intersection of Route 9 and Old Ferry Road. And then it's going to go down Route 9 all the way into town. So the parade's going into town. And it'll end by going down Crafts Ave, and then people will disperse there, and all of the marchers will probably just march directly into the parking lot at Armory Street, the Armour Street parking lot behind Thorns Marketplace, and that's where our vendors will be all set up, and our entertainment stage. Kayla, you want to talk about the vendors that we've got?
Sure, yeah.
You can move the mic.
over.
I love
Oh,
watching
okay.
you move in your chairs into the mic as opposed to swinging the mic.
This swivels.
Yeah,
Yeah,
This
we're
swivels.
still in new studios
Yeah, but
and
that was-
don't quite have enough mics for everybody that we like bringing in. So just take possession of the mic, make it yours.
Wait till Young at Heart Chorus is in here on Friday. Who knows what will happen?
Oh.
Betsy just gave us a terrified look, our engineer. I'm sorry, Kayla, continue.
It's okay.
The vendors.
We have about, I want to say, between 40 and 50 vendors. They're small businesses, small queer businesses. Clay coming in clutch with the list.
Yes.
So while we do have some bigger vendor booths, I mean, Tapestry is going to be there, which I think is super important.
Why is Tapestry important for those who may not know what Tapestry is or does?
Tapestry is a great harm reduction tool for really everybody, but I've seen them at a lot of festivals. They at Majestic, they supply all of our condoms, all of information about drug use, tampons, like lube, dental, like everything that you could possibly think of, Tapestry has. They're a great resource for trans people. And them just being present, I think, especially for harm reduction, is just like, we don't even really have to get into this because I could be talking about this all day, is destigmatizing just drug use I think is super important. So I know that they do testing too.
Yes.
So yeah, that was Tapestry. Trans Health is going to be there. It's another big name that we have.
They'll be on the show tomorrow.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, and then a lot of local Northampton places too, like Euphoria Float Spa. Wicked Whisk is one of our only food options at the festival.
They make some really good Pop-Tarts.
Oh, I have dreams of those Pop-Tarts. We saw them at the farmer's market 2 Tuesdays ago, and everything is gluten-free and dairy-free, plant-based.
Awesome.
She really kills it. It's going to be really, really great. But yeah, I think the most important thing to know is that we're not going to have alcohol or food at the festival, which is great because all of the businesses in town will get to benefit from that. I think that was like a big complaint of like past years, is taking the parade out of town. People just kind of disperse.
Or they go to the fairgrounds and they stay at the fairgrounds and then they go home from there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did. We organized a pub crawl too, so people can stay in town and all of the participating bars. Super excited for that, and hopefully it's just going to be all day long, just celebrating us. So, yeah.
Man.
So now, Clay, I'm assuming since the Gazette did a story featuring you in excellent heels on the Rainbow Crosswalk on Main Street in Northampton, by the way, I'm a little bit disappointed you didn't. Yeah! Oh, you did wear it!
I have a set of 7-inch
How
stilettos
did I
on
not
right
notice
now.
that when you walked there?
I'm not really 6'7".
Clay is our resident fashionista.
Oh my word, those are fantastic. They look like utility
They're
heels.
Yeah, they're
Great
like
pictures.
Timberland. Yes.
Timberland.
We'll get a
Fantastic.
picture online, but
That's going to be the only picture.
yes.
It's been years because of the pandemic and other, different incarnations of who's the organizer of this or that year of the Pride Parade. But as somebody who had to start a nonprofit board to get involved with the theater that I knew my kids were involved with, kind of reluctantly, but I'm glad that I did. That's a little bit of a similar scenario for how you got involved with this, where there was a vacuum and you felt like somebody's got to do it.
Definitely a vacuum. However, I did not have any reluctance. This needs to happen. Is really what it comes down to. Basically, when we found out that Pride wasn't going to happen in Northampton, and it was more official basically in late January, Celina reached out to me and she said, "Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Yes." And so we reached back out to Kayla, who we knew as basically a queer icon in Northampton, running the Majestic Saloon, the only queer bar in Northampton. And we got together and we just built a group around it and just found the people that were willing to put the time and the effort and the work in to make sure that we could have this event go off, hopefully flawlessly. We'll find out on Saturday.
So, Celina, you were involved in some of the previous organizations that were running.
Yeah, I was involved with, as well as Clay, in a previous organization.
Right.
So it was really important to me that this continued on. I'm from a community where pride is not a thing, and it's a thing that's insanely important to me. And then moving out here, I learned how important it is to the community here. I moved out here 3 or 4 years ago at this point. So it was right before the pandemic, yeah. So I was so excited
just
for it.
in time to see and then have it all taken away.
Exactly. So, and I moved here, actually it was right after Pride. So I didn't even get to experience it. And I've heard such great things. So anyway, just learning the importance of it, some of the history of it, and just wanting to be a part of the queer community out here. I knew that it needed to happen. So when we found out that it wasn't going to happen, that was when I reached out to Clay and I'm like, we need to make this happen. How are we going to do it? Let's do it.
Were you inspired to move here because of the queer community? Is it a place that you felt like you should come to because of that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So when I was a teenager, I used to come out here with family, and not because of the queer community, but my family liked some of the artsy scene out here. And I saw the queer community. And as a closeted person, I clung to that. And it was like, I needed to be part of that. So as soon as I was able to, I moved out here, and it has been absolutely amazing. But again, I wanted to be part of that community and continue it. So that was why I got involved.
And Clay, you told the Daily Hampshire Gazette a similar story. That's part of what brought you here, right?
Yeah, or at least it's what allowed me to come out. I know as you see me in these heels later on in the pictures, you'll ask, how were you ever in a closet? And I promise you it was glass. But once upon a time when, in ye olde days of the the mid 2000s, I was in undergrad and I was in the closet. And I remember getting my acceptance letter into UMass Amherst for grad school. And probably a month later, I had the courage to start coming out to small groups of friends and eventually to, family and more friends, and then moved on up north, because I lived in northern Florida, not so cute.
And getting less and less cute for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, and this was, I don't know, not during the DeSantis times, but Kayla also is a Floridian, ex-Floridian. So she knows the troubles.
That sounds like a band name. Please start a disco band called the Ex-Floridians.
Yes, that would be great.
Right?
Oh
also,
gosh.
Rhonda Santis is a great drag name. If nobody has taken it,
one.
Rhonda Santis. It's got to be taken, right?
Yeah.
That is fabulous.
I would go to that show.
I would too. That would be fascinating.
As would I.
Yes.
Well, coming up, we'll talk more with the organizers of this Hampshire Pride happening this Saturday in Northampton. Clay Pearson, Kayla Abney, and Celina Almendarez. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Yes!
Don't hurt me.
Betsy Cordes for the win with the bumper music here in the Fabulous 413 as we are having a great conversation off the air with the three organizers of Hampshire Pride this Saturday, Clay Pearson, Kayla Abney, and Celina Almendarez. We did confirm that Rhonda Santi is an actual drag name. Congressman Jim McGovern, who's a regular guest on this show, has read at drag story hours or attended drag story hours before, and I posed that his drag name could be Leggy Slator.
I like
with
that
an
one.
emphasis on the sleigh, and he's like a
Yes.
legislator.
I love that one.
Yeah, I love thinking about drag names.
Because
a
they
lot.
allow you to indulge in like your most base pun nature.
Yes, and puns are what I'm all about. But Clay, you
I
do
am
perform
the
as
inappropriate pun queen. That is my title.
that is your drag name,
And
inappropriate pun
yes,
queen.
I'm the inappropriate pun queen because I try to make inappropriate puns whenever I go out.
Please don't swear on the radio.
I'll
but
try not to.
are there ones that you can tell us?
I once went dressed up as a Christmas tree, and my name was Aretha Spruce.
And you were itchy for
Oh.
the rest of the night.
Yes, it was very itchy because it was actually made out of garland.
Wow.
Oh,
So I was very exfoliated the next day.
Yes.
Like a week later, after all the scabs fell off, I was mwah, beautiful.
And is drag is going to be a part of Hampshire Pride this
I'm
Saturday.
so happy about
Tell
this.
us about.
There are two queens on this list that I absolutely adore.
Ooh, who are they?
October,
Yes.
like who. I don't know if you've seen their
Oh, I've
their
seen
performance
it.
of him. They have a performance as him from Powerpuff Girls.
Yes.
It is amazing. It is one of the best like acts I've ever seen. And then Kuka, I adore. I adore Kuka DeVille so
Yes.
much. So much.
So we're going to have 2 drag reviews at our entertainment stage, and they're both hosted by the incomparable Priscilla Porcelain, also known as Holly Cox, who is one of our committee members. And she is going to be running 2, I believe 4 song sets. And it's going to be amazing. We've got a great lineup.
Oh yeah.
So there's a lot of fun that goes into these historically. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of fun that goes into these this weekend. Any more performances that are coming up that you're excited about?
The Lexi Weege Band is going to be our closer, and Faustak is going to be our opener. And in addition to that, we've got Lorelei is going to be a motivational speaker. And who else? Oh, we've got the mayor. How did I forget the mayor? So Gina Louise is going to be there doing a proclamation. And
You have a whole lot of other things going on. It's easy to forget mayor sometimes.
No, I literally got a sneak peek at the proclamation, and I think it's a really inspiring work. So everybody listen out for that one.
Cool.
We're speaking with 3 of the organizers of Hampshire Pride, coming back live and in person this Saturday, the first one since 2019, since the pandemic. It was really sad when in March, everybody's going to shut down, but thinking towards May, first weekend of May, which has historically been the first Pride kind of in the country in Northampton, and it not happening. I also mentioned this in the earlier interview, but my son edited together the video that became like the virtual version of Pride that happened that year, and it was really powerful and touching for me to have my son be involved in it in that way. My oldest son is very, very gay and has grown up in a community like the Valley where he's always been supported. And while he was never in a closet at all, it was transparent from Jump Street that he checked off all of the boxes for somebody that was likely to be gay. Not that everybody's type of gay is the same. You have all come from places to here to feel like you could be part of a community.
It's a gay mecca.
Yeah.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
But with what's been going on across the country, is there going to be an element of that in regards to what will happen on Saturday, addressing what's been going on in Florida, addressing what's been going on with trans issues, addressing the LGBTQ book bans across the country and things of that nature?
Yeah, so I mean, the anti-drag and the anti-trans and the don't say gay bills, they're just horrifying pieces of legislation, and you'll really need to listen to the mayor's proclamation. It really talks about being vigilant and making sure that we are ready for the next, unfortunate combat that we have to go against. So please listen to that and take it dear to the heart.
You have heels for the combat, I just want to say.
Oh, yes. You can't be going into battle without a good boot on with a nice sharp stiletto.
We also have Priscilla Porcelain, who will be speaking during the drag shows on some trans issues. She does that whenever, it's like every Thursday, I believe, at the Majestic. She hosts a drag show, and she always speaks on trans issues. So she'll be speaking there as well. I know she mentioned she had some stuff she really wanted to talk about there.
Yeah,
for
she's
sure.
a trans woman that is also a drag queen, just
Yes.
for clarification.
So
Yes.
inspiring. She
She's
is so
amazing.
inspiring, and every week it's just everyone just gets the chills, and it's so nice that between her and Lorelai, I think that Lorelai is like a trailblazing queer activist.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful
Everyone
woman.
knows Laura.
Yes,
Laura
exactly.
Rice's,
And
yeah.
she
A
definitely
force.
has said that she has some stuff to say as well. So very exciting stuff.
Speaking to community, it is like Northampton is a bit of a gay haven, but like I remember, like the Majestic Saloon is like the only gay bar left and there. And I remember when I moved into the area, like there was the Grotto and there was Divas and there were like other places to go. Like it feels like it might be a little bit of a burden. And I know like we're starting to grow those businesses back again, but do you feel like it's a bit of responsibility to be the one in town?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes down to it, when, I got the opportunity to reopen Majestic after COVID, I felt like, if nobody's going to do it, I'm going to be. And if I have to be the person to do it, then I absolutely will. And I think it was just super important for not only me, but for our community of, having this space for people. And, I didn't have a last moment at Divas. I was not living in the area anymore. And if I knew that the last time that I went to Divas was going to be my last time, like, it's just so heartbreaking. And I'm just
showing
really
my age by mentioning the Grotto. So
I really appreciate the space that Majestic has, and it takes a village. It's a lot of pressure, but it's also I get to lean on so many people. We have so much support, and that has been proven. All month when we've been planning, it's just like we have so much support, and it feels so nice. Because it can be a really scary time, but if you have the support system, it's all that matters.
So you got this going for this coming Saturday, and it's going to be awesome. But what are some things that you are interested in bringing to Pride as it progresses forward?
So I guess maybe our first thing that we need to do is bring a nonprofit status. So that is going to be my first, June 1st or so, once I take a little break of Pride overload. But I think there's a lot of other opportunities to either involve activism or understanding the community and what their needs are. It's not just a party, but you do have to celebrate, So this is a time for this year to be a celebration and a rebirth. And then next year, we can bring more stuff in there. I believe something that might be missing was a kids section that was exclusively for children. That's something that was talked about in prior organizations. There's a lot of other potentials to maybe have more than one stage and have one stage that's maybe kind of like TED Talks and inspirational, and one that can be, ra-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta dancing, to really just give a little bit of balance, because some people enjoy the heavy and enjoy the inspirational, and some people just need to, come out and de-stress.
Yes.
And hearing about the origins of how this all started, it's good to have both, I think. And Jane Fleischman, who was on earlier, was talking about how it's for a long time just been like old white people that have been running Pride, but this is a much more diverse organization, right? Anybody want to talk to that in the minute we have left?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Clay and I were part of the previous organization, that was a thing that was brought up that people in the city had mentioned was that it was just run by older white people. And Northampton has become so diverse, and it's so important to include people of color and other people in the LGBTQ plus community. So I myself, I am Hispanic, and I'm just so happy to be involved. We've got other people of color who are involved in leadership. We've got people of I've been joking, we have like every letter of the alphabet. We've got so much diversity now, and it's amazing, and it's good because it allows those minorities, their voices, to be heard and to be represented in something that should be an event celebrating everyone.
Quickly, where and when does the parade start this Saturday?
It's at 11 a.m. at Sheldon Field, and it'll be heading into town this year.
And then it'll wrap up at the Armory Street parking lot and happen
Yes.
all day and pub crawl all around Northampton and more.
Yes. Excellent. I can't wait.
It's going to be awesome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Clay Pearson, Kayla Abney, and Celina Almendarez, organizers of Hampshire Pride, The Return, this Saturday in Northampton. Tomorrow on the show,
Trans rights and trans healthcare have been garnering headlines nationwide. Trans Health is a Western Mass-based independent comprehensive healthcare center and clinic. And we'll talk with Trans Health CEO Dallas Dukar and Development Director M. Ayers in anticipation of their second anniversary event in Florence this weekend.
And Saturday is Free Comic Book Day, and this excited nerd sits down with Christian Reeder of Comics and More in East Hampton to talk about the significance of the event that turns 21 this year and how they are participating in it a little differently.
Plus, word nerd Emily Brewster on the ever-informalizing of the English language.
Our director is Tony It Is a Joke Done.
Our engineer is Betsy Bad Day But Good Mood Cordis.
Our technical team is Bart ineffectively yelling at Trains Rankin, Kara Bruce, no! Foster, and Punk Rude Boy Dubé.
Musical thanks to Spouse, Happy Valley Guitar Orchestra, Jonathan Richmond, Homebody, and the kids, Aaron McKillen, Thus Love, and more.
I'm Glee Smith.
I'm Monty Belmonte. See you tomorrow.